Well, thank you very much for having me. It is truly my honor and privilege to be with you here today. I want to thank you and your lovely audience. The program that I managed from 2010 to 2017 was, it seems a little crazy at the time, because really it was a very closely guarded secret. But my country was looking at UFOs. The program I ran was called AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And AATIP was a nuanced effort within the Pentagon, within the Department of Defense and our intelligence community to study unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP. But what I'd like to say first and foremost, this isn't the first time my country, or let alone other countries, have looked into this topic quite seriously. In fact, a lot of the credit goes to a country that my wife and I love dearly, which is France. You have an organization there named JAIPAN, and JAIPAN has been very instrumental historically into shedding insight, shedding light, and some understanding into this topic. Furthermore, you have individuals such as Jacques Vallée, who is over here in our country now, but is a native-born son of France, who has done tremendous work in this area. To be completely truthful, you say I've climbed the hill and conquered the hill and planted my flag, but it's only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Stood on the shoulders of giants to include individuals like you said, Senator Harry Reid, the late Senator Harry Reid, but also people such as Jacques Vallée, people like Chris Mellon, Hal Puthoff. I've been very fortunate. I'm by trade, I'm a military man, and so I look at the world very much like I look at a battlefield, and try to identify what hills we need to take first and how to take those hills. But again, truth be told, we rode on the backs of a lot of momentum that was and a lot of hard work that was done before us by other organizations and other people in other countries. So I just want to make it clear, as much as I appreciate those wonderful words you gave me, I probably don't deserve quite that much praise, to be completely forthcoming. A lot of my success was done because we have a lot of really good people working behind the scenes very hard, very diligently. Like you said, scientists, academics, pioneers in technology that are willing to adopt the spirit of Galileo, which was at the time a very unpopular position to take. And yet Galileo took the position that was right. And I believe we are, with regard to this topic, I believe we are on the right side of history.
Dag weg vampir dag shoch echta. Luis. Gach veshamer. Ech doch me which vetla. Vajigo.
I'm glad you asked me, because ultimately I'm not sure of the truth, but let me say why, if I may. There are two types of truths in the world. And depending on which truth you're asking, will provide a different answer. There are things that we call personal truths. Personal truths include things such as religion, perhaps political affiliation, things that are absolutes for us as personal individuals, but may not necessarily be held as a truth for another individual. Now, a personal truth as compared to, let's say, a universal truth. What is a universal truth? Well, a universal truth is something like gravity. Gravity affects you and me, and it affects this pen all the same. And therefore, it is a universal truth. And it is important that we have to be able to differentiate the difference between a universal truth and a personal truth. A universal truth is that this is a very real topic. These things are real. Now, where they're from, what their intent is, what all their capabilities are, why are they here? Well, that starts to fall into the category of personal truth because we simply don't know. And so when we don't know something, that leads us to two other possibilities. And that is, if we don't know, therefore we think and or we believe. And so either I believe something or I think something is or is not. And that will sometimes help inform my perspective on a personal truth. So I think the universal truth is that we are now in the throes of understanding a new paradigm, a new reality. There is something out there and something right here that has been here for some time, that it's not our technology, it's not foreign technology, it is something else, but it is technological and it is capable of doing things far beyond our own technology. That is a universal truth. Now the question is the personal truth. Well, I think, Baptiste, we need more information. I think we need more dedicated expertise to continue to look at this, because ultimately this problem is going to be solved not within government politics, but probably within the halls of our renowned academic institutions, in order to really understand the full implications of this. Because this is not unlike Galileo's proposition, which was that the Earth was not the center of the solar system based upon some observations of Copernicus. That was strictly science. But those observations had ramifications on, at the time, the religion at the time. This is a little bit different, because the acknowledgement of this particular reality affects more than just potentially religious institutions. It affects more than potentially governments. It potentially affects more than our civil construct and our understanding of civil order. It affects philosophy. It affects sociology, and to a very strong degree, it affects human psychology. And so therefore, this is a much more complex problem, because in order to some degree, in order to understand what this is, we first must learn to understand ourselves, because the way we process and interpret information is just as important as the data and information itself. And so we must make sure we do not, when looking at the data, we do not fall into the trap of cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance, because ultimately, I think to understand this incredible enigma, it's going to take a tremendous amount of great minds. Certainly, I don't have the answer. I can't solve it, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take some humility, frankly. So, again, to answer your question, what is the truth? Well, that really depends. It depends on if you confuse your personal truth with the universal truth, or can we separate those objectively and look at each separately and independently? Both can be true, right? You can have a personal truth and a universal truth that can be correct. You can also have them be at odds at each other. So again, there lies the conundrum. And I think my personal truth, I haven't made up my mind yet, because we simply don't have enough data. I'm very now, it doesn't mean I don't have opinion, Baptiste. I do have opinions, but I'm very careful. I'm very measured in offering my opinions, because quite frankly, it's too premature. We simply need more information, because ultimately the question is, well, are they from outer space, right? We're, as human beings, Baptiste, we tend to, and forgive me for digressing here, but I think it's important. We as human beings judge the universe based upon the glasses, the colored lenses that we are looking through, right? And that will cast a hue, that will jade the picture that we're looking at, and it's human nature. That's normal. But when we're having a conversation like this, we must do our best to remove whatever filters we have on our eyes and look at things for what they really are, and then hopefully, based upon that information, make an informed opinion. based upon what the data suggests, rather than allowing our opinion to drive, if you will, to drive a decision. We need to allow the data and the facts to help drive our opinions. And therein lies part of the conundrum, Baptiste, because we as human beings look at things very binary. If it's not here from Earth and it's not our technology, therefore it must be from outer space. Well, that's certainly true. It could be. But there's many, many other options. We're just now beginning to realize the wonder of the universe and how big and complex it really is. And we now know through observations in innovations such as quantum physics that there are other realities out there. In fact, if I may, let me give you a case in point with this simple cell phone here. As simple as this device is, this device can do things that I can't. It can see, if you will, in the Wi-Fi signal. It can see in cell signal, and it can see with GPS, and it sees the universe fundamentally different than we do. And yet it's just as real as we are. There's an entire invisible universe that this perceives that we can't, because if we can't hear it, we can't see it, we can't taste it and touch it and smell it, therefore we can't interact with it. And yet 99% of the universe, Baptiste, lies in that unobtainable area outside of our perception. Mm-hmm. If you were to look at any night sky and look at a beautiful starry night, you would see all these beautiful stars. I live here in Wyoming, where I have beautiful skies, beautiful unoccluded skies, almost every night. And yet, if I were to take that same portion of sky that I'm looking at and I look at it through a radio telescope, I would see a whole different reality in front of me. I would see nebula. I would begin to see in wavelengths that I never could have imagined, such as infrared and ultraviolet and X-ray. And all that is part of our reality. So going back to the question of whether this is from here or it's from outer space, the answer could be both. The question could also be, it could be from, frankly, it could be from, inner space, outer space, or the space in between. We now know that there are, through the observations of quantum mechanics, there may be other dimensions, other actual real dimensions that science resides, but we just can't. It's very elusive for us. We can barely detect it. Such as things as dark energy and dark matter, the invisible universe, where literally 90% of all the matter, if you will, in our universe is completely invisible. You can't even measure it. You can't weigh it. You can't touch it. It's a mystery. And so if we realize that the universe has this other facet, if you will, this other side of her, then maybe these things are from there. Furthermore, they could be right from here. They could be just as natural to Earth as we are. I often say, Baptiste, and again, forgive me for digressing here, but I think it's important. We are a very naive species, and we assume and presume far too often. The Romans and the Greeks recognized that there are two basic life forms on this planet. There were animals and there were plants. And it wasn't for millennia later that we realized there was this other in-between kingdom called fungus that weren't really plants and they weren't really animals, and they were their own life form on this planet, right? And up until recently, we thought that was it. There is no other categories of life. And it turns out only in the last century. Now, we've been around as Homo sapiens sapien for the last 100,000 years. And yet, in just the last 100 years, the last 10 minutes of our existence on this planet, we realize there's been this entire hidden living life form, organisms, if you will, on this planet, that if you were to take all the biomass of all the animals and take all the biomass of all the plants and take all the biomass of all the fungus on this planet and put it together, it still would not equal the biomass of this hidden kingdom of life form that we have discovered on this planet. And that is the kingdom of the realm of the microorganisms. In fact, the dominant species on this planet isn't animals or plants or fungus. It is this fourth animal kingdom that has remained hidden, invisible since the beginning of time. And yet, how is it that it's the dominant life form? Well, we are learning new things every day about life. We learn that life, every time we put a limitation, a box around what we describe as being life and where it can survive, we wind up being wrong. We realize, we thought long ago that all life had to survive off of photosynthesis. We now realize that's not true. There are life forms that survive off of chemosynthesis. There are some life that are actually where they are oxygen phobic. They are what we call anaerobic. Well, forgive me. There's those life forms that like oxygen, and then there are life forms that don't, that are phobic to our oxygen. So anaerobic life forms are certainly a different category. So forgive me for confusing the two. But we also realize there's animals and life forms that live in extreme parts of our planet, whether the bottoms of our oceans, where the crushing pressure is immense, or in the frozen miles of Antarctic ice, where we find microbes. In fact, we have found microbes hitching rides on our rockets into space. So I think we need to perhaps have a better definition of what life is first, before we can keep putting her in these tight little boxes, because the universe doesn't have to play by our rules. Mother Nature, she has a vote, and we forget that. Mother Nature has her own rules that she abides by. Forgive me though, I didn't mean to confuse the anaerobic versus aerobic. I was going, I think, a little bit too far down the rabbit hole. But my point being is that there's aerobic and anaerobic microorganisms. Some, and these are two different types of life forms. Some like oxygen, some will die in oxygen. So, and in fact, that's why we have oxygen therapy sometimes to help people who have very deep wounds that won't heal.
But to herbage.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet de boel. Dag weg vampik dag zo echt ha. Luis. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which betla.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet de boel. Dag weg vampik dag zo echt ha. Luis. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which betla. Wat je go. Wat to herbage. Wat je go. Wat to herbage. Mo gros mo par makaiwe. Na de vigos pu. Mo gros mo par makaiwe. Na de vigos pu.
Yeah, absolutely, Baptiste. We have in science the understanding of stimulus versus response, and plants will respond to sunlight, and animals will respond to certain stimulus, particularly fear and aggression, and just like humans do. Yes, we've seen this undeniably. These things are absolutely intelligently controlled. They will respond to our actions. In fact, Dave Fravor will tell you that when he came into contact in 2004 with the now famous Tic Tac, as he began to take evasive maneuvers, probably considered aggressive maneuvers, to get close to this thing, the Tic Tac orientated itself to his aircraft and then began to maintain a safe distance and mirror his maneuvers. Just a couple weeks ago, there's reporting, I can't go into detail, where there were some aircraft conducting some sort of military operation, and they did something very specific, and the craft apparently appeared to have reacted to that particular action, if you will. Mm-hmm. There's I'll share with you one of the pilots. I won't say who it is. Actually described when we were conducting one of the debriefings. when I asked the pilot, what was your observation? If you had to ascribe some sort of characteristic to it as it was following your aircraft or maneuvering, and what would you ascribe? What type of trait? And the pilot said playful. It almost appeared to be playing with us, like a curious child or a cat chasing a laser. That it was definitely aware of our presence. It was responding to us, but it almost appeared playful. That was the way, and I found that very interesting because normally, in military terms, you hear aggressive, right, or evasive, or something to that effect. But to hear the term playful
Yes.
coming out of a pilot's mouth, I thought that was really, really intriguing.
Not there because poop.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet je boe. Dag weg van per dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which we klap. Wat je go. Wat je her badge. De woord graag en en. De woord graag en en. Wat je go. Wat je her badge. Wat je go. Wat je her.
No worries. Please, as I've said before, Baptiste, everybody, you feel free to ask me any questions you want. If I can't answer them, I will certainly tell you I can't answer them, and I'll tell you why.
De woord graag en en. We goes more par makaiwe. Not there because poop.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet je boe. Dag weg van per dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which we klap. Wat je go. Wat je her badge.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet je boe. Dag weg van per dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which we klap.
Ja, dat lak.
Well, if it's easier and more convenient to have a conversation and state in the interim that this is adversarial technology, that's fine. We can come to the table and talk about nuclear technology. Russia, China, and the U.S. have nuclear technology, nuclear weapons. And if that's what it takes for us to sit at the table and have a conversation, I'm okay with it. In reality, though, we are all three countries are no better. These aren't adversarial technologies. It's probably more convenient to blame them in order to have the conversation and continue studying them. Ultimately, because you open up a whole bunch. You open up Pandora's box when you acknowledge what we're talking about. So I have no opposition to that. Ultimately, the conversation will go where it needs to go because as the data becomes more and more, how shall we say, apparent and provided to the people who need to know, it will become, I think, increasingly clear that this is not adversarial technology. But if it helps have the conversation in the beginning, then that's fine. I have no problem with that. Let's, if I can, though, for just a moment, at least from my country's perspective, let's just say that this has been some sort of Russian or Chinese technology that we've been seeing, and by the way, substantiated over the last 70 years, because we have the U.S. government official reporting on that for the last 70 years. That would mean that either Russia or China or some other country, right on the heels of World War II, when we were just entering the jet engine age, we had just barely broken the speed of sound, some country managed to have a technology that can travel 10, 12, 13,000 miles an hour in low Earth atmosphere and travel in space, air, and underwater. And by the way, the last 70 years, there hasn't been an inkling of that technology from any country at all. So if that was a case, this would be the greatest intelligence failure my country has ever faced, probably eclipsing that of 9/11, because that means despite the billions of taxpayer dollars we spend on this, someone somewhere has been able to keep this a secret for 70 years. And oh, by the way, fly it without impunity over controlled US airspace. That's not a really good conversation to have if you are in the national security arena. That's almost worse than thinking this could be something else, because that means if we there's that we have a significant amount of strategic surprise, and that we're going to have to deal with. It means we've had a total intelligence failure.
Gach v'shamer, edge dodge me which vitla. Vajiro, but the herbage. Vajiro, but.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, we have stacks and stacks of documentation that show this information.
Mogos mo par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu. Mogos mo par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu. Kejar. Tjeg voor nek de jebu. Dag weg vampek dag zo echt. Gach v'shamer, edge dodge me which vitla. Vajiro.
Wow. Well, I think there's been a lot of reasons. I think that's certainly one of them. Look, the first thing we do when we understood the atom is not generate power plants. We created a bomb. It is human nature to find ever more efficient ways to destroy one another. But that's not the only reason. There's also the reality that there could be a very real reason not to have this conversation earlier on. Let's look at this philosophically, if I may. There's three options. Either option one, these things are here to help us out, help mankind. Option two is they're neutral. And option three is they're here for bad reasons. So let's go down that logic train just for a moment. There's people who say, well, they're here to help us out. Well, when we dropped bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, my country, nowhere did UAP stop that from happening. In fact, nowhere did they stop the Cold War. Nowhere did they stop the nuclear arms race. They didn't stop any of the testing we did in the deserts or in the oceans. They didn't stop the Korean War. Iraq or anything else. They didn't stop COVID, and they haven't stopped world hunger or anything like that. So there's very little evidence to suggest that whatever these are, they're benevolent. They're here to help mankind.
I agree.
That only leaves two other options. They're neutral or they're bad. And if there is a remote possibility that they're bad, and what we do see is active surveillance of our military capabilities and nuclear capabilities, that has been substantiated, then the mere fact of tipping our hand and letting the world know that these things are real, from a military perspective, and I'm not saying this is the case, but let's just say hypothetically, if you were to put on your national security hat on, the possibility is well, if they're here now and they're doing some sort of surveillance or reconnaissance and what we call initial preparation of the battle space. Maybe they plan to come here in 50 years. And frankly, if we were to let the cat out of the bag now, instead of coming in 50 years, maybe they decide the element of surprise is over. They're going to come here tomorrow. And we have zero countermeasure. There's nothing we can do about it. So maybe some of the thought process at the time was, especially at the height of the Cold War, let's keep this secret for a while until we can figure out how it works, right? Why? Just like in the old program with the U-2, as I mentioned in that book there, in the forward of that book, Russia never admitted we had U-2s flying over Russia until they had a capability and could successfully shoot it down.
Mhm.
So why admit a problem for which there is no solution? Another one is, at the time, maybe there was some fear that it would disrupt the institutions and organizations of our world. Governments particularly. We have faith and confidence in our governments have answers to all the problems, and they're there to protect their citizens. And yet here we have something that we really understand very little about. Another option could be that maybe we don't want to let the bad guys know, our adversaries, how much we know or how much we don't know. So there's a lot of different reasons why somebody would want to keep this secret. And by the way, they're valid reasons. I don't agree, for the record, I don't agree with keeping this topic secret, but I can respect the decisions that were made in the past to keep it secret at the time. And I think this is why it's important that we don't villainize anybody or any organization that may have been involved in any type of legacy effort, because there was probably really good reason to keep it in the shadows all these years. But I personally believe the time has come for us to have the conversation with our citizens.
Not de vigos pu. Mogos mo par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu.
Vingadalak. Soch.
Kejar. Tje gewoon nek de jebu. Dag weg vampir dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Edge dodge me which we clap. Vad je ho. Wat je her badge. De voet graag ev en. De voet graag ev en. Vad je ho. Wat je her badge. Vad je ho. Wat je her.
Without commenting directly on it, there is a reason why psychological and physiological effects is now part of the law to determine what, if any, negative consequences are related to UAP. We must do our due diligence. We cannot be afraid to ask the question, because there is some data that exists that indicates, there's some individuals who have suffered as a result of this, coming up too close and personal to this technology.
Exactly.
De voet graag ev en. Mogos mo par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu.
Vingadalak. Soch.
Kejar. Tje gewoon nek de jebu. Dag weg vampir dag zo echt.
YouTube's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Everybody now is an intelligence collector with these things. They have the ability to collect extremely high definition pictures and videos. The problem is that these were never designed to capture UAP. They were designed to capture selfies from maybe five feet away. And so the technology isn't perfect for it, but there does exist in the unclassified world some very interesting video that appears to be potentially very legit.
Dag we shamer. Edge dodge me which we clap. Vad je ho. But
Yeah, can I show you right now what I have in the office? I'll be right back.
Go ahead.
Let me show you. These are very technical, so forgive me. These are literally the books I had on my desk at AATIP. So I have this one here. It's a very interesting book on advanced propulsion. And if you look in here, it's chock full of mathematical equations and tables and whatnot, but talks about the different types of advanced propulsion that we might expect and that we are learning about now on Cutting Edge. Another one is Introduction to Modern Optics.
Yes.
How light behaves, and not
Yeah.
just light, but electromagnetic energy to some
Mm-hmm.
degree. Another little book I had on my desk was Mathematical Physics.
Mm-hmm.
And then one I find pretty interesting here. Someone signed. I did not have this one on my desk at the time. This one was a little more recent, but this is kind of interesting. The Explanation Age.
I don't know that one.
It's these are technical books. Now, if you
Yes.
want something a little bit more philosophical to help the brain understand the non-binary way of the universe in a fictionalized way, there's a little book. It's a little novella, and the name of the book is called Chains of the Sea. And the second story particularly is a very short, maybe 40, 60 pages, and it discusses what a UAP, a presence, and the presence of another species, another life form coming to this planet, what it might do and how it might interact, and its relations to artificial intelligence potentially, and some of the other mysteries in this wonderful world we live in. And I find it very interesting because, to some degree, it is a fanciful book. It was written in the early 70s by a former Air Force member, which is interesting, but U.S. Air Force member. But it allows us to look at things not so binary. That I live here in Wyoming. I have a large group of indigenous people here that have been, frankly, here in North America for over 20,000 years. So we have the Crow Nation, which is an indigenous people here, part of Native Americans, and they look at nature and the world different than Western civilization. They have a much more intimate relationship with nature, and a lot of the things that appear to be paranormal, right, to Western culture, is actually considered quite normal for them. And I encourage people to remain open-minded. We live in an incredibly interesting and complex universe. We don't even understand our own minds and our own selves very well. So to say that we understand the world is a gross misstatement. We have explored more of the moon than we have the deepest parts of our oceans, and most of our world is covered by ocean.
Kejar, je gewoon niet de boel. Dag weg vampir dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which we klap.
Zo.
Kejar, je gewoon niet de boel. Dag weg vampir dag zo echt ha.
No, I mean, there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of, the problem, we have to be careful not to speculate too much, right? Because we're just now walking along this path, and it's pretty, we got pretty far to get to our destination. There is information to both support and refute that. I think ultimately, we have to be careful not to put all our eggs in one basket, proverbially speaking. But it's certainly possible. There's also people who say, well, what if a bunch of species out there decide, you know what, let's have this neutral test tube where we're all going to put some of our equities all in one little ball and let it go for 3 million years, and let's see what happens. Maybe 250 million, maybe 500 million years. Let's put all of our stuff into one little planet. You put some of your stuff, I'll put some of my stuff, you put some of it. Let's just sit back and watch what happens. Will those life forms eventually be able to work together, right? Who will come out on top? Who will be on the bottom? What is this test tube Earth? What would these environmental factors do ultimately to the evolution of different types of species? I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities And again, I say this not because I believe it. It's just one of 1,000 different possibilities. We just simply don't know yet, Baptiste. We need more data. We need more information. And frankly, we need smarter people to get on board. People, as like, for example, like Jacques Vallée, but we need a lot of Jacques Vallées, and we need a lot of Avi Loebs, and we need a lot of Gary Nolans and whatnot to help us have this conversation.
Gach v'shamer, et doch me which betla.
Vajiro. Bak to herbej. Vajiro. Bak to herbej.
Mogos mo par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu. Mogos mo par makaiwe.
You know, it's also to some degree perception and personal bias. I remember with my wife, one of the favorite cities my wife and I and my kids like to go to is Paris. And we remember one time going to a little cafe off the Champs-Élysées, and as we were going down to have a wonderful little dinner, the Eiffel Tower began to light up. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We just sat there in total awe looking at it. And yet next to us was a family from somewhere else, obviously visiting Paris for the first time too. And I remember the grandmother being terrified. She actually was terrified by the beautiful light display that was being done. And it was partly because she didn't understand what it was. And she had memories, I guess, in her own country when she was small of that being something else as it related to war. I guess it reminded her, I don't know for sure, because she was very upset by it, but it maybe reminded her of some sort of signal that, you know, during World War II, they were going to get bombed. I don't know. But people have different reactions to sometimes the same stimulus. And we have to be mindful of that, because this topic can mean different things to many people. Some people report having a wonderful, blissful experience seeing a UAP, while other people have left absolutely terrified and never want to see one again. And is it because that these things are bad, or that they're good, or is it because that the human brain is independently interpreting data and information different than, let's say, the person standing next to us?
Not de vigos pu.
Ja, dat lak. Ah, zo.
Kejar.
Well, I would tell anybody, if you want proof, just go out swimming one day in the ocean in a bathing suit and, you know, start splashing around where in shark-infested water, and you're going to realize real quick you're not at the top of the food chain. I live here in Wyoming, and when I go up into the mountains, I'm reminded all the time that I'm not at the top of the food chain. There are animals out there that, you know, will definitely remind me that I'll make a quick snack.
Dag weg vampir dag shoch ekta. Gach v'shamer. Et doch me which betla.
Vajiro. Bak to herbej.
De voet rach ev en. De voet rach ev en.
Vajiro.
Yeah, well, former CIA director actually was Woolsey, who was on a interview, and he talked about an aircraft reportedly just stopping in midair and then continuing to fly. You know, does an aircraft just stop in midair? No, probably not, because it needs air underneath its wings. It needs to have lift to fly. But the fact that it just stopped and then all of a sudden kept flying, you know, was what may be an example of that time dilation. And yes, it's not just on biological systems. If there is a difference, a delta in the way something experiences space-time compared to the outside environment, then one would expect to see those same effects also on the material, perhaps on things that chronometers, for example, things that measure time, particularly, and speed.
Oh. Bak to herbej.
One would certainly expect that. Yes.
De voi rach ev en. Mogos moch par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu.
Well, Gary Reed was a very powerful rook, but he was limited in his ability to maneuver. I think the chess piece on the chessboard that I've always been probably most respectful of is that of the knight, because it's the only piece that does not move in a linear fashion. It moves in an asymmetric fashion. And because of that, it can be one of the most dangerous pieces, but also one of the most valuable pieces on the chessboard. In fact, if you look at intelligence, a lot of times I have several around here actually, my office, of that piece, that chess piece, the horse, the knight, if you will. Look, I wish no ill will on Mr. Reed. I don't appreciate what he did to me, and I don't appreciate what he did to my colleagues. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we are succeeding in our mission, and I think people like that ultimately will reap what they sow. I believe in that. I've seen it too many times, and this is way too important of a topic for just one person to influence. And I'll also say Gary wasn't the only guy. Gary Reed. Gary was doing this at the behest of other people. So the question is, who are those other people? Well, we know who they are. But again, this is why we must not seek retribution. Rather than hold up a fist and say, I want truth and transparency, I think the time has come to extend a hand and say, welcome, come on board. Let's have a conversation. No one's going to hurt you here. We're not looking to. We don't want our pound of flesh. We do not want to persecute anybody. Whatever decisions were made in the past, we're willing to forgive that. Please, let's have the conversation for the benefit of all of humanity, and we are willing to forgive and forget some of those transgressions that may have been done against some of us. There is, and look, I'm a man of, I'm a man who's spent too much time in war and conflict, and there's a time for that, unfortunately. But there's also a time to embrace somebody and call them your brother, and we really must try to hold ourselves above the fray. And try to live by that as much as possible, even if it's at our own personal expense, because it's the right thing to do. It ultimately it benefits everybody if we can do it that way. Sometimes we can't, but we must try. We must try to take the moral high road whenever we can, and it's not easy. Believe me, I know. I can tell you firsthand, it's not easy. But we have to try to do that. We must show compassion and we must show grace whenever and as often as we can, even if it's hard and we don't want to do it. Yeah, and also explain to them that the current way of doing things, the current paradigm, isn't working for them. That if the pyramid waits too long, the wind and the rain and the sand will wear it away to nothing.
Oh, nice.
It will disappear. So
Nice.
Doing nothing forever isn't the solution either.
Mhm.
And how do you convince the pyramid that there's a better way, right?
Mhm.
And that, look, by me climbing on the pyramid, I'm trying to maintain it. I'm trying to keep it shiny and keep the cracks and seal the cracks so water doesn't get in there. And you have to convince the pyramid that it's in its best interest to allow you to climb on there. And yes, the very act of climbing is going to cause some erosion wearing away, but in the long run, it's going to preserve it much better, and the integrity ultimately of that pyramid will be maintained. And that's what really this is about. It's maintaining the integrity of the system, and integrity of our people, the integrity of our governments, and our faith and confidence in those institutions and governments. And so to do that, the governments have to realize it is in their best interest to have this conversation, because the truth is already coming out. And the longer that they ignore it, the more that will start to work against them. People will begin to lose faith and confidence in something that is so obvious as this. There is no more good reason to keep it secret and locked away, and it will actually work to the detriment of a government if they're not careful here pretty soon.
Gach v'shamech, et doch me which v'tla.
Vinga dat lak. Zo.
Kejar, tjech vornech deh jebu.
I have not done, unfortunately, much reading lately because I have been extremely busy. It is on my to-do list. I have a stack of books that I have to read. Unfortunately, next week I'm going right back to Washington, D.C. Last week I was in Colorado. My schedule is not my own. I am extremely busy, and unfortunately, when I'm not in those places, I'm here doing these type of things. So unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of time. But now that I'm pulling away from social media, this is one of my very last appearances for quite some time. My hope is to have a little bit more personal time to do some more reading.
Dach weg vampir dach shuch echta. Gach v'shamech, et doch me which v'tla.
Vajiro.
Yes, and unfortunately, I can't go into more than that at this time.
But to herbage. Vajiro.
That's a hard question to answer because we don't know if it's actually increased or if more people are now feeling comfortable to report and come forward. And so therein lies the problem. It's just like crime rates on the street when you hear that, well, crime has gone up 10% or has gone down 10% this year. Well, has it really? Or is it there's more police on the streets, or are the lawyers convicting, or are the judges throwing more cases out? We have to be careful with numbers because you need a lot of numbers for it to really make sense. And we just don't have a whole lot of numbers yet that we need.
But to herbage.
Mogos moch par makaiwe. Not de vigos
I can't go into that, unfortunately.
pu. Mogos moch par makaiwe. Not de vigos pu.
Vinga dat lak. Zo.
Kejar, tjech vornech deh jebu.
Yeah, well, I mean, Christopher Columbus had reported UFOs, on his first journey over to the New World. And 1492, navies have been reporting these for a very long time. In South America, in Lake Titicaca, right there, Bolivia, they've been reporting these things coming out of the lake, fishermen for a very long time. There's even some anecdotal evidence to suggest that even Phoenicians may have witnessed strange luminous objects over the water and in the water and coming out of the water. So this is nothing new. The Navy has been dealing with these for some time. There's another extraordinary case that may come to light here very soon, that if it does, it's going to rock people's world. But the USS Nimitz wasn't the first time the Navy has encountered these, and I'll just leave it at that.
Dach weg vampir dach shuch echta. Gach v'shamech, ex-Dutch me which with la.
Wat je goh. Wat
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I can't go into
I know.
that right now,
I
but
know. It's a good question.
phenomenal question.
je herbert.
De voy graag even. De voy graag even.
Wat je goh. Wat je herbert. Wat je goh.
I mean, it's certainly possible. You know, that's one of the nightmare scenarios that,
Yes.
the display of force. We don't know. Certainly from a national security perspective, it's something that some people have considered. But we also need to make sure we don't panic people, right? Let's look at COVID, for example. As terrible as COVID was, and everybody thought this is going to, some people here, anyways, thought the end of the world was coming. We survived, and in fact, we not only survived, but we thrive. The human species and all of Earth is extremely, extremely resilient. That's why we're here today. And some would speculate it's actually healthy for the species to go through these type of changes, because it forces evolution and adaptation, usually in favor of the survival of the species. So whatever these UAP may be, I would encourage people not to be afraid. Be curious. Don't be afraid. Don't let your fear control you. Be curious. Maybe be cautious. But don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. These things have been here for an awfully long time so far, and that we know. And so, chances are, if something really bad was going to happen, there's a good chance it probably already would have happened. Not saying that it can't, but I think I think we're dealing with something that's probably neutral. People ask, why are they so evasive? Why don't they just show up? Well, they do show up a lot. And I would submit to you that if you go to some of the exhibits, the zoos in China right now, where they have the pandas on display, the zookeepers and the caretakers are required to wear a little furry panda suit. And they do that so they don't disrupt to the least degree possible the pandas inside the exhibit. And so maybe what we're doing is seeing something similar here, where whatever these UAP are, they don't want to disrupt what is going on here too terribly. They're maybe they just want to observe and see what's going on and see how we behave. And maybe there's resources on this planet. Maybe there's particular resources that are very interesting, or maybe scarce. So that'd be my recommendation. But very good question. And by the way, for the record, I don't have an answer for that question.
De voy graag even. Magosmo par makaiwe. Not de.
We are not.
No, they are not. No, they're certainly not invincible. And they are subject to the same physics that we are. They may have a better understanding of it, but they still are subject to the same physics we are.
Yes.
De vigos pu.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet de boe. Dag weg van per dag zo echt ha. Dus. Dag we shamer. Het Dutch me which we klap.
Wat je goh. Wat je herbert.
Ja, dat lak. Zo.
Het jaar. Je gewoon niet de boe.
Oh, okay. I think all data is important. I think if there is any example of something we should all work together towards, this is one of them. There is no reason, if I was ever in a position, which I am not, but if I was ever in a position politically to lead this conversation, first thing I would do, I would sit down with Russia and China, and then very, very, very shortly thereafter, I would probably go to some of our friends in San Marino and ask them officially if they will set up some sort of, think of Geneva, where we could set up some sort of international body, perhaps under the United Nations, minus some of the bureaucracy and politics, and open this up to the world and have every country that wants to participate be able to participate, and as citizens of the world, and say, okay, we're going to put our politics aside for a minute. We're going to put our energy aspirations aside for a minute. We're going to put our differences aside for a minute, whether it's climate or industrial or militarily or politically or whatever. And let's just focus on this for just 2 weeks. Can we agree that this is important? Can we sit down and can we focus on this, because it involves all of us, and you deserve the truth as much as I do. And we can respect each other as human beings. And then after this is over, we can go back to whatever nonsense that we were doing before. But can we get together once a year? Just once a year. Mm-hmm. And can we sit down like civilized human beings and focus on the 80% of what we agree to, and let's just forget about the 20% of the disagreement stuff we disagree on, and focus on the 80% just for now. Because maybe, just maybe, this would be one hell of a great way for our species to evolve and get out of the competition of resources. It's not helpful. Like I said, I'm a product of warfare, and pretty good at it. But I've also learned warfare is not a solution. It is the very last thing that you would ever want to do. War never solves anything. All it does is create two losers, and one loses more than the other usually. But there are no winners in war. There's only losers.
Sure. That's very true.
It'd be great if we could all get together and talk about this for a little bit, and all across all spectrums of the political sphere, right? So whether you're liberal or conservative or anywhere in between or above or below, let's put politics aside for a minute. Let's just sit together as human to human, as brother to brother, sister to sister, look each other in the eye and say, let's focus on this. And for just 1 week, my interests are going to be your interests, and your interests are going to be my interests. I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot comment on that. What I've said for the record is all I can say at this time. I have said about all that I can say, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it at that. I wish I could expound upon that, but I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Yeah, I think we talk about disclosure, and I think disclosure is not an event; it's a process. And I think if we look back now, I think yes, we've had disclosure. Certainly, in my country, we've had 2 former directors of CIA, 2 former sitting presidents, and a current director of NASA, and a current director of national intelligence, and a current deputy secretary of defense, and members of our Congress and our Senate and our House of Representatives, all saying it's real. Our military members, our special operators, our pilots, they've all said it's real. They've all seen it, and I've seen it. So yeah, I think we have disclosure. What I don't think we have yet is transparency.
No,
that's going to take a lot more time and effort, unfortunately, to get full transparency. very blessed man, in fact. But I also want to thank you for what you're doing. It's making a difference. Ultimately, I'm just one person, one man, one voice. But you are many. And I want to thank you sincerely for taking this topic seriously and treating it with the respect that it deserves. And just say, thank you for being on the right side of history. And also a big thank you to your audience. No matter what their opinion is on this, thank you for spending the last hour with me. I sincerely and humbly appreciate it. Thank you so much.